What's a symptom of a severe disease you wish you or a loved one hadn't ignored? Story 1. When I was 31, I just knew something was wrong. The depression hit out of nowhere, the fatigue was crushing, the weight kept falling off, and the pain was constant. Deep down, I knew it was cancer. But no one listened, not at first. It took 8 specialist doctors and 9 long, terrifying months before I was finally diagnosed with aggressive stage 3 colon cancer. By then, it had almost cost me my life. Because it took so long to find, I spent the next 4 years in a brutal fight just to stay alive. Story 2. I, 34M, have back pain that I ignored and managed for months with painkillers. When I went to the doctor, they say I had stage 4 lung cancer, barely symptomatic, that had spread to my bones, brain, and livers. Now I'm in palliative care. Do your checkups, folks, even for the smallest nuisances. Edit typo. Story 3. My dad had a stomachache for a few months. Kept nagging him to go to the doctor. He didn't was a basal cell cancer metastasis. R.I.P. Dad. We miss you. Extreme thirst and using the bathroom more. Both signs I had type 1 diabetes. Story 4. Melanoma. Mine didn't look like any pictures I had ever seen of melanoma. It looked like a tiny earlobe growing on the side of my face. I had planned a trip out of town and wanted it removed beforehand. It looked weird, and I didn't want to bother covering it up with Band-Aids, so I asked my dermatologist to remove it. He did, and he sent it off for a biopsy which came back borderline 3rd stage melanoma. So after a scary, intubated general anesthesia operation by a plastic surgeon and a night spent in the hospital, all I can say is, please have your skin checked, regardless of what something looks like or doesn't look like. And use sunscreen. P.S. After the operation, my pathology report came back clean, but am being monitored every 4 months for 2 years, so fingers crossed. Story 5. Constipation and hemorrhoids. It's not something most people talk about much. It turned out not to be hemorrhoids or constipation. It was colon cancer. Story 6. My dad felt generally run down for a few months and had a toothache. It didn't even occur to him to go to the doctor for a cold because he's very fit and had never been sick. Turns out he had squamous cell carcinoma in his throat. Never smoked and drank only moderately. Has 7 years cancer-free. Story 7. Great uncle trod on a nail, went straight into his big toe. He ignored it, and he ended up with gangrene. Had one leg off, then it spread to his other leg. Thankfully, he died before the op to remove his other leg. He had been a POW on the Burma Railway, survived that, and died because of a stupid nail. Story 8. Burning in my feet at the end of the day. I didn't ignore it. I actually brought it up to several doctors. They said it was probably perimenopausal neuropathies. I would cry at night, beg my husband to rub-squeeze my feet because it helped with the nerve pain. Turns out my B12 was in the single digits, should be over 300. I now have permanent neuropathies that couldn't been reversed. I also have brain fog, insomnia that DID improved W supplements, decreased sensitivity in my hands shake when I get tired, increased clumsiness because of weakness in my legs. I learned to say, okay, it may be that, but we need to rule out other causes before we assume it's something that can't be corrected. Story 9. I ignored the fact that at one time I couldn't get up without heart palpitations and was fatigued, only to find out my hemoglobin levels were critical and I had to get 3 blood transfusions and 2 iron infusions. Story 10. My dad had a pain in his chest for months. Kept saying it was nothing and he would go to the DCR when he had holidays. The DCR said it was nothing and to come back in a few weeks. Went to a different doctor a few weeks later. They said nothing was wrong and come back in a few weeks. He went to the physio the next week, who immediately told him to go and see a specialist because there was something definitely wrong near his liver region. Stage 4 bile duct cancer. Died roughly 2 months later. Story 11. Not a disease, but a disorder. I wish my parents never ignored the signs of me having OCD when I was younger. I could have gotten better mental health treatment back then. Story 12. I had a friend who thought her weight, skin, sleep, and mood issues were just her personal failings depression, but it turned out to mostly be thyroid dysfunction. She suffered many years without knowing that. I don't know anyone personally, but I've heard similar things around long COVID. Story 13. Not me, but sister was always sick growing up. Upset stomachs, food making her ill, round face, couldn't take weight off. Parents never believed something might actually be wrong. Finally got diagnosed with celiac disease after college. Having a gluten allergy or being gluten sensitive is much more commonly talked about today. But there is a huge difference if you actually have celiac. It's an autoimmune disorder that untreated can affect the liver, spleen. It can cause osteoporosis, anemia, damage your nervous system, increase risk factors for infertility and pregnancy loss. It affects so many systems long term. If you think you might have it, get tested. It was totally life-changing for her. Story 14. When you have a wound and it leaks orange, it's past infection stage. You're at death stage. Please don't ignore simple wounds. I miss my beautiful leg. Story 15. I don't remember it because I don't think it was mentioned to me because I was very little at the time, but my mother told me that my father would occasionally mention that he thought his heart might be beating irregular. Not much was thought of it at the time, but years afterwards he had major problems with heart arrhythmia and eventually died due to it. Story 16. I went to the university doctor because the Phil Mickelson Humira commercials for psoriatic arthritis resonated with me. I told the doctor all my symptoms, including the very odd loss of sensation in my toes. Doctor said I was too young for arthritis. This is a whole other thing. And then he flippantly said the toes makes me think about MS, but it probably is nerve damage from wearing shoes that are too small. Oh, okay, that is what I shouldn't have ignored. Flash forward 6 more years, and yes, I do have psoriatic arthritis, and showed the classic symptoms of it from age 12. I was 31. I never ever said anything again about my toes. I was put on Humira. Humira is contraindicated with multiple sclerosis. It can result in more lesions. So 2019, I started to have all kinds of numbness after I fell down on ice. The fall caused an arthritis flare-up from the injuries of the fall. My very sharp GP took my numbness very serious, did a mini neuro exam in the appointment, sent me for an MRI. And guess what? It is MS. My shoes were never too tight. Story 17. Hallucinations and delusions. Bipolar disorder. A common symptom when it's undiagnosed. Me? Ignored this for about 5 years. It's a gradual thing that sneaks up on you, though you also kind of know it's happening. I got better. Eventually. Story 18. My BIL had an enlarged abdomen, fatigue, and a weird ashen pallor. He was a hippie who rarely went to doctors. He just thought he was getting older. He finally went to a doctor, and it turned out he had hepatitis and had probably had it for decades. He left it so long that there wasn't much to be done. We flew out to be with him on a Wednesday, and he was gone the next Tuesday. Story 19. Wife was anxious and eccentric. Sometimes she would speak poetically. Then she got into witchcraft, crystals, astrology, and made an altar to a Greek goddess. I tried to be understanding and accepting. Then one day, she accused me of performing black magic on her. A week later, she disappeared into full-blown psychosis. I haven't heard from her in over a year. I didn't know I could be this sad. Story 20. My husband had an addiction to Whippet nitrous oxide canisters. When I say addiction, I mean it was constant, and the spent canisters were everywhere. He already had some physical and mental health issues, and I think he was using them for pain management. No matter how much I begged him to get help, he refused. He started having delusional thoughts and signs of mini-strokes but wouldn't quit and said they were harmless. He died of a heart attack at 56. Now scientists say there is evidence that long-term use has serious side effects, including risk of heart attack. Story. 21 small purple and red birthmarks appearing suddenly. Not overnight or instantly, but enough that we liked seeing them on my mother's fair skin. The kids all thought they made her fancy. Diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer and died 7 months later. Don't ignore any unusual symptoms. Get your annual physical and don't be afraid of colonoscopies. Stay safe. Story 22. My sister was recently diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. It's already spread into her abdominal cavity. The main symptom she had, in hindsight, was heartburn. Had never really been a chronic thing for her, and she realized, yeah, she's had quite a bit in the last year or so. Story 23. My dad ignored a persistent and inexplicable cough for months. Turns out it was leukemia. I had a friend who started forgetting words and getting headaches. Didn't think much of it at first. Then it got worse. She went to the doctor. It was glioblastoma. She was dead within the year. Story 24. Wish my stepdad hadn't ignored the tiny cut that wouldn't heal inside his mouth. Turned out to be oral cancer. He was dead within 10 months of his diagnosis. It broke my heart because he was a good man. COVID and all the restrictions played a huge role as well. He would have survived if we hadn't been in a pandemic, probably. The way he deteriorated was the stuff of nightmares. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Story 25. Blood. Bladder cancer. RIP and happy Father's Day. Back pain. Had intermittent pain in the middle of my back. That didn't stop for a week. At a point I was barely able to move and I almost don't make it to the hospital an hour away by train subway walking. I went all the way there only to find out I had sepsis that shortly after developed into septic shock and I literally almost died. The root of the problem? UTI without symptoms other than kidney pain. I had no idea how kidney pain felt like before that. I was told urosepsis is very rare in young people, in my 20s. Also, the triage person wanted me to go to another hospital, LOL. But I stayed there because the pain was so bad. Story 26. My best friend's sister felt really bad and had back pain for about a week and a half. She finally called an ambulance, and when they got there, she literally collapsed and died in front of them. Turns out she had sepsis. They weren't able to save her. She didn't go to the doctor sooner because she didn't want to wait in the waiting room forever. She was only 23 and left behind her 12-month-old baby girl. It was horrible. Story 27. Suddenly, at the age of like 11 or 12, anytime I do excessive exercise or sports ID, break out in hives and go into anaphylactic shock. The doctors had assumed it was just my asthma and prescribed me an EpiPen. Slowly, it went from any exercise to big bursts of anxiety that made me break out, exposed skin, which lead to me always wearing pants and long sleeves, small scratches or different feeling fabrics, extreme change in temperature, sweating, strong perfumes, or excessive breathing. My mom, long story, never got it checked out. It went almost 6 years not being diagnosed or checked. When I moved in with my godmom, we finally went to a dermatologist for it, and they were puzzled. To this day, they don't really know what it is. I was prescribed anxiety medicine that chilled it out somewhat. They assumed maybe dermatographia or just extreme asthma. Still don't know to this day. Story 28. Well, we didn't ignore it, the doctors did. I kept telling them my dad's diarrhea wouldn't go away. They said it was nothing. Finally took him to the ER, but it was too late. He died from C. diff. He was the worst human being on the planet, but that shouldn't have happened. Story 29. My mother got increasingly cruel in slow increments, and only on private, so teenage me figured I was the problem. She had cancer that had already metastasized to her brain. Story 30. My mother-in-law found a lump in her breast and was too scared to have it checked out. At some point later, my father-in-law felt it and insisted she get it checked out. She died of breast cancer and left behind a 9-year-old and a 14-year-old. This is still not okay with me. Story 31. My mom complained of numbness in her face. Then she started to get very emotionless and monotone. We found out after she had a stroke she had stage 4 glioblastoma terminal brain cancer. This was a year ago, and it's a miracle she's still with us. Story 32. Not as extreme as others, but after the first time I had COVID, I would have really bad bouts of presyncope nearly every day. I couldn't stretch, move suddenly, stand up, or lift things without coming close to passing out every time. My heart would hammer in my chest as if I just ran a marathon. I would be gasping for air, vision would black out, ears would ring loudly, and I would lose function over my limbs and basically ragdoll anywhere from 30 seconds to 5 minutes, but remain conscious. Turns out after having COVID, I had developed postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, aka POTS. COVID caused my vessels to weaken and so blood pools at my feet. I also can't be hydrated by water alone and have to have electrolytes way more often than the average person. It's landed me in the ER one too many times. Story 33. Started going to the bathroom less and less. Instead of taking a every day, it was like twice a week. Would pee like once a day, and when I did, it was always dark yellow despite drinking a lot of water throughout the day. My appetite plummeted to where I couldn't even finish a meal because, as I would later learn, I had 2 liters of fluid in my abdomen. Took becoming jaundiced to go to the doctor and found out that I had drank myself into cirrhosis at 36 years old. Now I need a liver transplant. Story 34. My dad ignored heartburn and ulcer-like symptoms for months and had never had a colonoscopy until he was almost 60. He was also in the medical field. When he finally decided he should be checked out, the scans showed colon and pancreatic cancer. He survived for about another year after that, but suffered more than I would ever wish on anyone. Story 35. We thought my uncle was just getting clumsy, even made fun of it. When his speech started to be impacted, my aunt still didn't think anything was wrong, but I was very concerned. They tested him for countless things. Turned out he had ALS. Died within a year. Of course, there was nothing that could have been done, but I think they could have found out earlier. I also didn't know ALS is diagnosed by eliminating everything else. It can take a long time, apparently. Story 36. My dad died when I was 11 years old. I'm 33 now, but he went blind and got both his legs amputated due to diabetes. He was also an alcoholic, so that didn't help his case either. He died at 44 years old. Wish he would have helped himself to improve, but even after everything, he kept drinking. Story 37. My aunt ignored leg sores for 10 years, and probably other symptoms too, because she had such a terrible phobia of doctors and hospitals. Her leg got so bad that it had to be amputated. Her health deteriorated after that. She died a few years later, probably of melanoma, but we're not sure. She was vital and active before all this. A retired teacher who loved to travel, but her fear of doctors and checkups was the end of her. My family is all about preventative screening now. If the doctor says we need a test, we get it, and we're grateful for good insurance. Story 38. A good friend's wife had a really painful and sore leg out of nowhere for a day or two. She said she would go to the hospital the following day and see if a night's rest would make it go away. It was a DVT that became an emboli and killed her. Story 39, leg pain. It took my 35-year-old sister's life due to a massive embolism caused by deep vein thrombosis. Tomorrow makes 5 months since. She took a piece of me with her. Story 40. I would have fainting spells when I was a teen. The doctor said it was growing pains. When I moved to Toronto at 19, I saw a specialist and was diagnosed with epilepsy. The fainting was me having a seizure and losing consciousness. Story 41. My leg started collapsing. Pain like you wouldn't believe. Couldn't sit. Couldn't walk without a walker. Became bedridden. Went to tons of doctors. I had deep infiltrating endometriosis. My organs were all stuck together and my sigmoid colon was adhered to my hip internally, pressing on nerves, etc., causing my leg to collapse. I had been on the birth control pill for 20 years straight without a period. Had painful periods, but no one ever caught it. It was growing all those years. By the time it was diagnosed, I had a lot more pain, pelvic, digestive, but the leg pain was first, and I thought I was never going to walk again. Took 2 years. Story 42. I wish my dad hadn't thought that all doctors were quacks and gotten his prostate checked as often as he should have. Died from prostate cancer last year. Story 43. My dad started having a weird cough before his cancer was detected on a routine scan. He always had a cough and allergies, so we didn't pick up on it except in hindsight. The cancer, he is fairly treatable before it metastasizes, but it wasn't found until it had spread. It was very aggressive. I can't help but wonder if he'd be alive if we'd noticed it sooner. Story 44. My partner had a lump on his tongue that didn't go away. Waited way too long to see someone about it, and it ended up being a very aggressive form of cancer. Had to get his entire tongue removed as a result. 1 year later, and our lives are very different now. Story 45. My mom's dearest best friend of 30 years felt ill for a long time, but didn't go to the doctor because they had no insurance. By the time she finally went, her vitals were so poor, her doctor called 911. She was diagnosed with leukemia and was gone within the year. I miss you, Debbie. Story 46. Nosebleeds while I was sleeping and night sweats. I was actually severely anemic, and when I got diagnosed, they told me that a few weeks later I would have died from a cardiac arrest. It was Crohn's disease. Story 47. For many years, my father had gastrointestinal issues. Nausea, dyspepsia, reflux, burping, weight loss. He got a colonoscopy, which was clean. He got other tests, all GI related, all clean. Then one day, he coughed up blood and went to the ER. Mass in his lung, adenocarcinoma, stage 4 already spread to bones and brain. We were shocked as he had no lung breathing symptoms until it was already stage 4. Basically, if you have weird symptoms pop up out of nowhere, especially unexplained weight loss and night sweats, don't stop until you get an answer. His cancer might have been treatable if it had been discovered sooner. Story 48. Weight loss without doing anything or taking the weight loss meds. Ended with stage 3 breast cancer that went into my lymph nodes. I lost 60 lbs and the doc just said, "Good, you're losing weight." Story 49. My husband had a terrible cough and felt like he was congested for a few days. Each day was worse than the other. Started having chest pains as well, but I thought he just had the flu and convinced him that was all it was. He was having a heart attack. Cough and congestion were from fluids building up in his lungs from his heart not working properly. He had a STEMI with a 100 blockage. He survived but has severe damage to his heart and is in heart failure. Doctor told him his life expectancy has been significantly shortened. Has 40 and now has the heart of an 80-year-old man. We have 3 kids and I don't know what I'll do if I lose him. Listen to your body. If something seems off or wrong, go to the doctor. Story 50. Adrenal cancer. We chalked the sudden weight gain in our teenage daughter to hormones. In hindsight, it was classic overproduction of cortisol, irregular periods, hair loss, hair on her face, then the hump. Only the few and far between beat that. Story 51. Blood and stool. I was told for years to lose weight because my stools were from hemorrhoids. In December 2024, I began trying to get a referral to a GI. Finally, last month, I was able to get in and have a colonoscopy. I came out of the procedure with a rectal cancer diagnosis. I am 41F. Please, if you think something is not right with your body, seek help. Follow up. And if you aren't satisfied with your care, look for a new doctor. Story 52. This thread makes me realize that I'm going to die alone from something out of the blue. No family, no partner. If something crazy happens like an aneurysm, my dog will be the only one to see it. Story 53. Sore throat squamous cell carcinoma, was scared to go to the doctor for weeks. When she is finally diagnosed, she passed 3 months later from the treatment. Story 54. Back pain that felt like my kidney was hurting. Ended up being pneumonia. Then I had never-ending extreme thirst, 103 fevers that would go down to 96 and 97 body temp, dizziness, confusion, nausea, could barely breathe, couldn't move, couldn't keep literally anything except water down, always tired. Thought my body was taking a long time to beat pneumonia, but I was becoming septic. Almost killed me, had painful procedures, and surgery ended up fine in the end. It's interesting because something in my head randomly kept telling me to look up sepsis symptoms, and I did, but told myself the symptoms are common with other things, but I couldn't shake the thought. Prior to this, I barely even knew what sepsis was, just knew it could kill you. People say your body knows, and it's true. It can't explain why I kept getting the thoughts to look up sepsis symptoms and pay attention, but whatever it was, my body knew also would get fatigued and out of breath so easily, walking up the stairs. I'm out of breath, and I've never been fat. Getting dizzy very easily, just generally always feeling weak. Turned out I was very low iron, and had lived that way for at least 14 years, literally started laughing when the doctor told me that, and he looked at me hella weird. Only found out because of the sepsis. Got iron infusions a few times, and I feel alive now. IDK, how to explain it? I just feel healthier and upgraded now. Story 55. My brother drunkenly told me that he had blood in his. I laughed and said it was probably just hemorrhoids, but maybe see a doctor. He died of colon cancer a year later. Story 56. My mom showed symptom after symptom, but was just a stressed and anxious mom. My whole childhood I had a mom who, for a lack of better word, was bedbound. 15 years later, scleroderma, progressive, salt in the wound. The doctor refused a biopsy of a spot on her leg 3 times. Once done, the doctor made a nurse inform her of skin cancer this week. Story 57. My husband had sores on his legs, or had itched his leg just a little bit, and would have blood running down from the spot. It was leukemia. He was gone 10 months after diagnosis. Miss him dearly, and wish I had known something wasn't right. Story 58. I was itching incessantly for 7 months. No rash, hives. It felt almost electrical. Nothing worked. No creams, meds. Only thing was marijuana and ice. I averaged 2 hours of sleep per night. I noticed sugar inflamed the itching, so I cut out all sugar, even fruits. I was very thin, but worked out a lot and assumed it was due to my zero sugar diet. I saw 13 doctors. None were concerned. I got a swollen lymph node 4 months in, off and on fevers, joint pain which I attributed to my job ballet, and my skin became almost translucent. Turns out the itch was the Hodgkin's itch, and I had cancer. Hodgkin's lymphoma is the cancer they say you would want to get if you get cancer because it's extremely treatable with chemo 96 survival rate. It still sucked. I was only 30 and didn't have kids yet, so I thought I never would be able to. I felt I couldn't compare to other cancer patients and hardly call myself a survivor because of how downplayed Hodgkin's is. Story 59. Before we were together, my late husband went into a walk-in clinic with an engorged right testicle. The physician ignored it and said it was probably a STI and sent him for labs. Came back clear, so he went in again. Same thing, ball was even bigger. But again, physician told him it was likely an STI. It wasn't. By the time he went home to his regular doctor 6 months later, the testicular cancer had metastasized into his stomach, lymph system, lungs, and brain. He had 4 cranial surgeries and 6 months of chemo, and he lived. We met 3 years later and were together for another 9, but one of the inoperable brain tumors took him in the end. I miss him every day. Story 60. I was too young to remember this, but my father got very sick in his mid-40s. He couldn't stay awake. He was a doctor and would fall asleep during surgeries. He would fall asleep at red lights. Eventually, he was too sick to work anymore. He didn't ignore it, but the doctors had no idea what was wrong and thought he was dying. Eventually, a family friend, a rheumatologist, said, "Have you been tested for Addison's disease?" Turns out he had secondary Addison's disease, which means his pituitary gland didn't send enough hormone to his adrenal glands to create cortisol, which is necessary to live. I believe primary Addison's is more common, which is what JFK had, but he kept secret. A simple bid dose of cortisol cured his ailments, but if he didn't take it as required, he would have an Addisonian crisis, which he experienced when he was in his 70s and recovering from spinal surgery in a rehab facility. He kept telling the nurses what was happening, but they ignored him. He finally called 911 himself. The ER doc said he wouldn't have survived if he had waited any longer. Story 61. My nan had a very, very bad cough for 3 weeks. She was only 65. She was diagnosed with lung disease, but they said it should be treatable, but the medication didn't do anything. You know what shouldn't be forgotten? Your gut instinct. She kept saying it was more than that. It was. She died 4 weeks later. The cancer spread everywhere. She kept telling us she was going to die before Christmas and started very quickly putting her affairs in order. We obviously thought she was being dramatic as we listened to the doctors. Within a week, she collapsed. They scanned her. She literally couldn't have lit up more. Story 62. My father had left shoulder pain for 3 days. Thought he strained or tore something and had a doctor's appointment for the next week. Unfortunately, you know how the story ends. Story 63. Almost 3 years ago, my husband was having night sweats, lost a considerable amount of weight, he's a big guy, so wasn't super noticeable, and had some petechiae looked like little reddish spots. Blood work showed his WBC was off the charts high. Chronic myeloid leukemia. Luckily, it's treatable with medicine, and so far he's doing well. But no clue he had it, except I made him go see a doctor because he was 42 and had insurance. I didn't know about the night sweats. A friend of mine had been diagnosed with it a couple years earlier, had no clue until they got blood work done when they ended up on the hospital with COVID. Story 64. Sudden onset diabetes that doesn't react to medication. Pancreatic cancer is rarely diagnosed until it's stage 4, because this is a commonly missed symptom. Story 65. Towards the end of 2022, at the beginning of 2023, my dad, 66 at the time, knew something was off with his digestive system. Over the course of the next 6 months, he went numerous times to his family doctor to find out what was going on, and was told repeatedly that it was simply constipation, that it was common at my dad's age, and to continue taking the over-the-counter laxative that the family doctor initially prescribed. My dad persisted. He just knew something else was going on. And eventually, at the end of those 6 months, his family doctor told him, "I give up. I can't figure out what's going on with you, so I'm referring you to an internal medicine specialist." Within a week or two of my dad's first appointment with the internist, he was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, along with a pulmonary embolism. He was diagnosed June 2023 and stayed with us until April 2024. The saddest thing was that my dad knew and always reminded anyone who would listen that you must advocate for your own health. And in this case, he was advocating for himself. It was the dismissiveness of his family doctor that resulted in a late diagnosis and death sentence. Miss him every day. Story 66. I got wheezy for years, especially in the cold or after working out. I thought I was unfit despite me doing sports every other day or the week. I have asthma. Thank God it's only mild. And I live in the countryside and don't smoke or vape. Story 67. Started developing deep and debilitating depression and gained 30 pounds in a few months despite no life changes at 14. Over the next few years, I had never-ending stomachs, random left foot numbness, and no periods for years. Started to have zero appetite in 2021 and lost 20 pounds, but it wasn't noticeable in my stomach. Midway through 2023, I had a debilitating pain in my left side that left me in bed for hours. That happened a few times. I thought I had ovarian cysts. Turns out I did in fact have an ovarian cyst, but it was 27 pounds that grew from my left ovary. I had emergency surgery and lost my ovary to it. But I also lost everything else that came with it. It had been growing for close to 10 years. It scared my family to death because it was hard to figure out if it was just a cyst or a mass. But M100 recovered, stopped taking depression medication, and started living again. Story 68. I had stomach burns but thought it was because I was eating too spicy. It wasn't it. But it didn't help. It was the first signs of the chronic illness I ended up having. Story 69. Dad died a couple years ago of a pulmonary embolism. He was going through preventative chemo for stage 3 colon cancer after the doctors removed a third of his colon. Couple rounds of chemo in, he starts complaining of chest pains on his right side, where his port was. Chemo team doesn't say anything about it, doesn't mention it to his doctor, just tell him it happens sometimes. We tried to get him to go to the emergency room, but he refused, saying he was going to tell his doctor at his checkup the next day. Last thing he and I talked about was how everyone else at chemo was so much sicker than he was, how he felt bad complaining about his chest pains. He died that night, after severe stomach issues and fainting a couple of times. At least 2 of the ladies he did chemo with are in remission now, after battling leukemia. Life's funny like that sometimes. Story 70. I woke up on my birthday 2 years ago in the middle of the night and couldn't see anything out of my left eye. I thought, funny, my eye must be asleep still. I got a drink and went back to bed. I kept opening my eye to check if I could see or not and eventually fell back to sleep. The next morning, I could partially see. 6 months before, I had went to the ER because I was seeing weird in that eye. I mean weird like people on the TV were melting. I looked in the mirror and I didn't see me. I looked wrong. I was panicking and the ER said, well, it's a migraine in my eye. Gave me meds, and after 6 hours or so, it was fine. My birthday, I thought, well, must be another migraine in my eye. So I waited. After 3 days, my daughter said, "Mom, call an eye doctor." They said it was an emergency and got me in immediately. I had hundreds of old blood clots and a huge blood clot blocking my main artery, killing off my eye. He said, well, it's happened before because of the old blood clots. So the first migraine was actually strokes in my eye. And this time, it had hundreds of strokes in that eye, and since I waited, I can't get the vision back. It's like looking through a windshield covered in heavy rain, and I cannot see anything right below me, so toys in the floor. I tripped over a pillow the other day and broke my knuckle. Very annoying not to see where I'm stepping. The ophthalmologist said he never sees this in anyone under 80. Lol, okay, thanks. I did the shots for 6 months in my eye, and they want to do surgery, but I don't see the point if I can't get any vision back. Not the first time doctors have overlooked something important. Don't go to the ER for your eye being weird. Just go straight to an eye doctor. Story 71. I wish my doctor had stressed the severity of what he thought my liver was doing, but he just said it looked okay. Note it wasn't, and I now have cirrhosis NASH. Story 72. Blood in urine stool. If you have blood coming out of your body when it shouldn't, go see a doctor. It could likely be colon cancer in the case of my family member or bladder cancer in my case. Force them to take it seriously. Story 73. My best friend passed away from breast cancer, and before she died, she told me to always be aware if you smell different. She said she knew she was ill when she smelled different. I asked her what it smelled like, and she said, different. Story 74. My husband's nan got a cough over the Christmas period, but it didn't go away. She had the cough for months before finally going to the doctors. Her husband only enabled his wife, saying it was just part of being old and that it was a waste of time to go. She had lung cancer, and because it had been left so long, it was too late. If she'd gone to the doctor earlier, it would have been treatable. The day she died, her husband insisted he needed to get his morning paper, as he did every day. He said we all needed to get on with life. Since her death, he says constantly he's just waiting to die to join her. 7 years on, and her clothes are still hung in their wardrobe, and he talks to her ashes as though she's still living. For someone obsessed with telling people they should move on, he certainly hasn't. Not that I blame him, but the way he's handled his grief is so toxic and isolating. Story 75. My granddad not controlling his diabetes led to end-stage kidney failure. I remember him telling me he wished he would have listened when the doctor told him to keep a watch. His kidney function was low. He passed October 2024. I miss him dearly. Forever 78. My grandparents were married for 60 years. My granddad passed first. It was weird because before he passed, he had a cough. It wasn't COVID or nothing, just a cough. My grandma passed April 12th of this year. She had health issues, but she passed unexpectedly. She also had a cough before she passed, and she wasn't sick. I always thought it was weird, and I wish I knew what it was.